The U.S. Civil War was one of the most defining and brutal conflicts in American history, shaping the nation's future in ways that still echo today. While most people know about famous battles like Gettysburg or legendary figures like Abraham Lincoln and Robert E. Lee, there are countless lesser-known stories hidden in history. Some are strange, others are tragic, and a few are downright unbelievable. From daring escapes to unexpected alliances, these forgotten tales offer a fresh perspective on a war that tore a country apart. If you love diving into the hidden corners of history, make sure to subscribe to our channel so you never miss a new story from the American Old West and beyond. Congress got in a drunken fistfight. In 1858, tensions in the U.S. Capitol provided an early glimpse of the divisions that would soon lead to war. Congress was locked in a heated debate over Kansas's statehood, particularly its proposed constitution, which allowed slavery while also prohibiting free black people from settling in the state. Northern Republicans strongly opposed the measure, leading to days of intense discussion that stretched late into the night. As the hours dragged on, many members turned to alcohol to stay awake. By 1:30 a.m., tempers were flaring. Lawrence Keitt, a Democratic congressman who had been drinking heavily, stood up and insulted Republican Galusha Grow. Grow immediately fired back, refusing to be spoken to in such a manner. The exchange quickly escalated, and Keitt lunged toward Grow, sparking chaos across the chamber. Amid the commotion, the Speaker of the House attempted to restore order by striking the ceremonial mace, a traditional symbol of authority. However, the action was misinterpreted by some as a call to arms. In the confusion, a congressman grabbed a metal spittoon and struck another member, further escalating the disorder. The situation only began to settle when Representative William Barksdale found himself caught in a struggle. As he broke free, his wig accidentally slipped off his head. Flustered, he quickly retrieved it and placed it back on, only to realize he had put it on backward. The sight of the normally serious lawmaker wearing his wig the wrong way brought unexpected laughter from the room. The humor of the moment diffused the tension, and the brawl came to an end. Despite the deep divisions in Congress, the unintended levity offered a temporary pause in hostilities, reminding everyone just how fragile the nation's unity had become. The Union was obsessed with coffee. For Union soldiers, coffee wasn't just a luxury, it was an essential part of daily life. In fact, letters and diaries from the time mentioned coffee more frequently than words like war, bullet, Lincoln, or even mother. It was a constant companion providing warmth, comfort, and a much-needed energy boost. Each Union soldier received a yearly ration of about 16 kilograms of coffee, ensuring they had a steady supply. Every morning, troops brewed their coffee before facing the day's challenges. One rifle company even designed a weapon with a built-in coffee grinder in the stock, a testament to how deeply coffee was woven into soldier life. Given that most troops spent far more time in camp than in battle, the grinder likely saw more use than their ammunition. Confederate soldiers, however, had a very different experience. Union blockades severely limited their access to coffee, making it a rare and highly sought-after commodity. In desperation, some Confederate troops experimented with substitutes, brewing mixtures of roasted potatoes and rye to create a dark, bitter drink that mimicked the look of coffee, though it lacked the caffeine boost. The impact of caffeine went beyond personal preference. It even influenced military strategy. One Union general carefully planned his attacks around his troops' caffeine consumption, believing that the heightened alertness and energy from coffee gave them a strategic advantage. In a war defined by endurance, the simple act of drinking coffee became a powerful tool for morale and performance. An audience came out to watch one of the first battles. Before long, the Civil War had begun. On July the 2nd, 1861, a force of 30,000 Union soldiers marched toward Centerville, Virginia, preparing for what would become the First Battle of Bull Run, known to the Confederacy as the First Battle of Manassas. The battlefield was just a short distance from Washington, D.C., and many civilians saw it as an opportunity to witness history firsthand. At this early stage of the war, many Northerners believed that the Union would achieve a swift and decisive victory. Confident that the conflict would be brief and relatively uneventful, some decided to make a day of it by watching the battle unfold. At dawn, a procession of carriages and wagons made its way to a nearby ridge overlooking the battlefield. Spectators settled in with picnic baskets, eager for what they assumed would be an exciting but controlled event. One woman even brought opera glasses, using them to get a closer view of the action. As she watched, she expressed her delight, exclaiming, "That is splendid, and oh my, is that not first rate?" The presence of onlookers added an unusual dynamic to the scene. Some Union soldiers approached the civilians, offering real-time explanations of the unfolding battle. A few spectators became so engrossed in the moment that they attempted to move closer, blurring the line between observer and participant. However, as the battle progressed, it became evident that the Confederates were gaining the upper hand. A sudden cavalry charge surged forward, unexpectedly sweeping up civilians who had wandered too close. In the chaos, some spectators were captured, while others struggled to escape. As panic set in, the once eager audience hurriedly retreated back toward Washington, realizing that war was far from the spectacle they had imagined. One of the main causes of death was diarrhea. Although soldiers spent much of their time waiting rather than fighting, they were never truly out of danger. The greatest threat during the Civil War was not enemy fire, but disease. Poor sanitation, overcrowded camps, and limited medical knowledge allowed illnesses to spread rapidly. By the war's end, disease had claimed nearly twice as many lives as combat. One of the most widespread and deadly illnesses was dysentery, which caused severe diarrhea. In fact, nearly as many soldiers lost their lives to this condition as to battle itself. The issue became so prevalent that an unspoken rule emerged on the battlefield. If a soldier was tending to personal needs, enemy fire was to be withheld. The war even gave rise to a phrase still heard today, having good guts to be a soldier. Originally, this saying had nothing to do with bravery. Instead, it referred to the physical endurance required to survive harsh conditions, as those who suffered from chronic illness often had little chance of making it through the war. Thousands of soldiers held massive snowball fights. On a chilly morning in 1864, Confederate soldiers awoke to find their camp blanketed in 13 centimeters of fresh snow. Instead of dreading the cold, the men seized the opportunity for a moment of levity in the midst of war. What followed was one of the largest snowball fights ever recorded, a brief respite from the hardships of military life. As many as 20,000 soldiers took part in the spirited battle. Troops from Tennessee and Georgia organized themselves into two opposing forces, mirroring the structure of real military units. They constructed makeshift fortifications, gathered piles of snowballs and prepared for an enthusiastic charge. On the Tennessee side, Colonel Gordon added to the spectacle by riding into the fray on horseback, waving a soiled handkerchief as if it were a battle flag. Instead of giving orders for attack, he playfully pelted his own men with snow. Throughout the Confederate camp, similar snowball skirmishes erupted. Soldiers used their formal military training to coordinate volleys of snowballs, launching them with precision at their mock adversaries. Some men, caught too close to enemy lines, found themselves dragged into opposing ranks, only to have their shirts stuffed with handfuls of cold, wet snow. For a brief moment, these young men, many still in their teens, were able to set aside the grim realities of war and enjoy a playful return to boyhood. But as the snow melted, so too did the fleeting joy of that winter morning. Soon the soldiers shouldered their weapons once more, marching off toward real battles where the stakes were far greater than a shirt full of snow. The King of Siam offered war elephants to Lincoln. Before the outbreak of the Civil War, King Rama IV of Siam, modern-day Thailand, learned that the United States had no native elephant population. To the king, this seemed like a significant oversight, one he was eager to correct. King Rama IV saw elephants as essential creatures, valued not only for their strength but also for their contributions to labor and transportation. In many parts of Asia, elephants were used to carry heavy loads, clear forests, and, on occasion, even serve in military campaigns. With this in mind, when war erupted in the United States, the king saw an opportunity to offer what he believed could be a useful solution. In 1861, King Rama IV sent a letter to President Abraham Lincoln, making a generous and rather unexpected offer. He would send as many elephants as Lincoln required. The animals, he explained, could be used in various ways, perhaps to aid in transportation and construction, or simply to roam freely in the forests of America. Given the scale of the conflict, the king may have even envisioned these elephants being used to support the Union's war efforts. Lincoln, ever the diplomat, responded with gratitude while politely declining the offer. In his reply, he acknowledged the generosity of the Siamese king and expressed his deep appreciation. However, he pointed out a key issue. The climate of the United States was not well suited for sustaining an elephant population. Our political jurisdiction, however, does not reach a latitude so low as to favor the multiplication of the elephant, Lincoln wrote. In other words, while the gesture was appreciated, the practical challenges of housing and maintaining elephants in North America made the proposal unfeasible. Though Lincoln turned down the offer, one can't help but wonder how history might have played out had he accepted. Would Union forces have found innovative ways to integrate elephants into their logistical operations? Could these massive animals have altered the course of the war, even if only as a symbol of strength and perseverance? While the idea of war elephants roaming the battlefields of the Civil War remains an amusing what if, the exchange between Lincoln and King Rama IV serves as a fascinating glimpse into international relations during a time of crisis. Even in the midst of war, diplomacy and goodwill could still find their way across oceans, sometimes in the form of a rather unexpected gift. A battle stop to watch a fistfight. During the intense fighting at Saunders Field, something unusual happened, something so unexpected that it briefly paused the battle itself. As Union forces fired upon the advancing Confederates, one Southern soldier, seeking cover, leaped into a gully, But as soon as he landed, he realized he wasn't alone. A Union soldier had already taken refuge in the same spot, and now the two found themselves face to face, representatives of opposing sides, caught in an awkward predicament. For a moment they stared at each other, uncertain of what to do. Then a debate broke out. Each man was convinced he had captured the other. The Confederate soldier argued that since the Union soldier was in the gully first, he had effectively been cornered. The Union soldier countered that his opponent had just arrived and was now in enemy-occupied territory. Neither was willing to back down, and neither wanted to concede defeat. Rather than resorting to weapons, the two decided to settle the dispute in an unconventional way. They agreed to engage in, as they called it, a regular fist-and-skull fight, a contest of strength to determine who had the upper hand. The sight of two men emerging from a gully and engaging in a physical struggle was so bewildering that both armies momentarily ceased fire. Soldiers on both sides watched, captivated, as the two combatants wrestled and threw punches, each determined to claim victory. It was an unusual break from the brutal realities of war, a moment where individual struggle briefly took precedence over the larger conflict. Eventually, the Confederate soldier managed to overpower his opponent, bringing the scuffle to an end. Recognizing defeat, the Union soldier honored the agreement, and both men retreated back into the gully to avoid the renewed gunfire as the battle resumed. The two remained in their shelter until the chaos had passed. Once the fighting was over, the Union soldier kept his word and presented himself as a prisoner. It was a rare instance of honor and sportsmanship in the midst of war, a reminder that even on opposing sides, soldiers were still individuals navigating the strange and unpredictable moments that war often created. An entire university signed up. At the onset of the Civil War, the University of Mississippi had a modest student body of 139. Of these, an overwhelming 135 chose to enlist in the Confederate Army, answering the call to serve in defense of the South. The university, which had been a place of learning and academic pursuit, was quickly transformed into a makeshift hospital for wounded soldiers, its classrooms now serving a far different purpose than they had originally intended. The students, despite the transformation of their campus, remain united in their resolve. All but 4 members of the student body joined forces to create Company A of the 11th Mississippi Infantry. The company, later dubbed the University Greys, became a symbol of dedication and sacrifice. They fought with a sense of camaraderie that was unique, being composed largely of young men who had once sat in the same classrooms, sharing the same aspirations for the future. However, the Greys' journey was marked by tragedy from the outset. They suffered an extraordinary casualty rate, with none of the original members returning from the war unscathed. The unit became infamous for having one of the highest casualty rates of any Confederate company. Every member either returned wounded or did not return at all. Their story is a somber reminder of the brutal cost of war, particularly for those who fought in the front lines with little regard for their own safety. Ironically, the Greys were supposed to have fought in the First Battle of Bull Run, a pivotal early conflict in the war. However, their train was delayed, and many of the soldiers missed the battle altogether. This stroke of bad luck didn't prevent the company from experiencing its first casualty, though. Colonel Moore, leading the group, accidentally shot himself in the foot, a painful yet telling moment of the unpredictability of war. Despite this early setback, the University Greys continued to fight, advancing through the ranks and participating in several key battles. They came very close to seeing the war's end. But the final chapter for the unit came on the last day of the Battle of Gettysburg, one of the bloodiest and most significant confrontations of the entire war. In a final, desperate charge against Union forces, the Greys fought valiantly. But, as with so many others, their courage was not enough to secure victory. The charge at Gettysburg marked the end for the University Greys. Of the Confederate soldiers involved in the charge, half perished in the assault, and not a single member of the University of Mississippi's once proud unit survived the battle. Their story, tragic and poignant, underscores the brutal reality of war, the sacrifice of young men, many of whom were barely out of their teens, who gave their lives for a cause that, in hindsight, would have profound and lasting consequences for the nation. The Greys became a symbol of unwavering loyalty and an enduring reminder of the personal costs that were paid in the name of war. People bought tickets to watch prisoners of war. Elmira Prison became one of the most notorious and devastating detention centers during the Civil War. Initially constructed to house 5,000 Confederate prisoners of war, the facility quickly became overwhelmed as the conflict stretched on. As the number of prisoners continued to rise, the prison's capacity was exceeded, with nearly 10,000 individuals confined within its overcrowded walls. This surge in population contributed to a dire situation, as resources became strained and conditions deteriorated rapidly. Outside the prison, local civilians grew increasingly curious about the conditions inside. It didn't take long for an enterprising individual to see an opportunity in this curiosity. Across the street from the prison, a viewing tower was erected, offering visitors the chance to observe the prisoners. For just 15 cents, people could climb to the top of the tower, enjoy some peanuts and lemonade, and watch the lives of the imprisoned unfold before them. This strange spectacle, akin to a form of entertainment, quickly became a popular attraction for locals eager to witness the plight of the prisoners. As time passed, the prisoners began to realize that they were being observed. With little else to do and boredom setting in, some of them started to perform for the crowds. They juggled, did acrobatics, and even put on mock shows to entertain the spectators above. The prisoners, facing unimaginable conditions, found solace in these small moments of agency, using their performances as a way to assert some control over their situation. However, the guards, ever watchful, soon put an end to these acts. The prisoners' small attempts to find meaning and distraction were halted, leaving them with nothing but time to reflect on their grim reality. As the days wore on, disease began to spread rampantly through the camp. The lack of proper sanitation, overcrowding, and inadequate nutrition created a breeding ground for illness, and nearly a quarter of the prisoners died from various diseases. Despite the dire conditions, the civilians continued to come and pay the price to watch. For a small fee, they observed the prisoners as they suffered, their lives gradually slipping away. This macabre form of entertainment raised troubling questions about the morality of spectatorship and the detachment of those observing human suffering from a distance. Elmira Prison's legacy is a stark reminder of the inhumane conditions endured by many during the Civil War, particularly the Confederate prisoners who found themselves trapped in a system that could not care for them properly. The camp's dark history remains a poignant example of how war can strip away the dignity of individuals, turning them into both victims and, tragically, entertainment for the public. A Yankee shot Santa Claus. By 1863, the Union's naval blockades had brought the South to the brink of collapse. The blockade, designed to cut off vital supplies, severely impacted everyday life in the Confederate States. Prices for essential goods soared, and families were struggling to afford even the basics. The harsh economic conditions meant that many parents found themselves facing an especially difficult Christmas, unable to provide their children with the gifts they had come to expect during the holiday season. As the festive season approached, parents were forced to confront the painful reality that they could not provide for their children in the way they had in previous years. To avoid disappointing their young ones, some parents came up with explanations for why there would be no Christmas presents. For some, the solution was to tell their children that Santa Claus would not be able to visit them. In more severe cases, parents explained that Santa had been shot by Union soldiers during his travels, a grim tale that reflected the harshness of the times. Other parents, however, sought to soften the blow, offering a gentler excuse. Many told their children that Santa simply couldn't get through the Union blockade, unable to cross the blockade lines that kept the South isolated. Though this explanation was somewhat less disheartening, it still underscored the difficult circumstances that the families found themselves in. For many children, the inability to have their traditional Christmas celebrations, including the arrival of Santa Claus, represented more than just a missed holiday. It was a symbol of the widespread hardships that the war had imposed on their lives. In her memoir, one woman recalled the impact of these explanations on the young minds of children during the war. She described how, as a little girl, she would spend hours poring over maps, trying to find a route that Santa Claus could take to reach her home. Her innocence and longing for the magic of Christmas were evident, but the war's constraints and the blockade weighed heavily on her imagination. This moment from the Civil War reflects not only the material deprivation families experienced, but also the emotional toll the conflict took on children who were forced to confront the reality of a world where innocence was harder to preserve. While the war devastated homes and lives, it also altered the way children experienced the simplest, most cherished traditions. The stories families told their children about Santa Claus during the war highlight the resilience of imagination in the face of hardship, but also the heartbreaking impact of a nation torn apart by conflict. As we uncover these lesser-known tales from the U.S. Civil War, it's clear that history is far more complex and often more surprising than we might think. From the forgotten heroes to the strange moments that shaped the course of the war, these stories remind us that every chapter of the Civil War has its own untold mysteries. If you found these hidden stories intriguing, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating insights into the Old West and the Civil War. We've got plenty of untold stories waiting to be explored, and you won't want to miss out.